The production designer is the person on the job who is taking the writer's words and turning them into images. It really is the primary job of the production designer. So we are taking the writer's words and making them into something real. And we collaborate, of course, we're collaborating with the director on those choices, and the cinematographer is also part of that process. But the process starts with us. Usually what happens is you're going in and you're talking with the director and you're giving that person your thoughts about the script and your impressions with the script. And when I really want a job, what I will do is that I will come in with some research material, which includes photographs or references or visual references. That very first meeting becomes very important because the director is trying to get a sense of how I'm responding to the material. I'm trying to get a sense of what the director is trying to do and whether or not I feel that I can collaborate with that person on their journey. Research is fundamental. Now, again, some directors are very visual and some directors are not. Now, what I need from a director at this point is not visual solutions. I'm not asking that director to tell me what he or she wants visually. I'm asking them to tell me how they feel about the script, what's important in the script to them. The mythology in the business is that the director knows all the answers. This is not true. It's important for the director to know is what's important in the story, what's important in the script, what is it about this story that's important to them. And then I will take all of those ideas and they will become part of how I begin to build a visual vocabulary for the film. The other thing that's actually probably more important to me as a designer is how do I feel? What do I want the audience to feel? And how am I going to communicate my feelings in the choices that I'm going to make? And that's where the referencing, and that's when the research becomes important, because the research is going to do one or two things. It's either going to inspire you or it's going to confirm what you have in your head. Then you begin to work with other departments. You begin to work with the locations department. The location, and again, the mythology of the business is that the locations department is working with the director. That is not true. What happens is that the locations department is part of the art department in the very beginning of the process. When you're working with me, the locations department never talks to the director about anything visual. I go out, they bring me back choices, I limit my choices, I go out and I scout those locations, and then I will choose the 2 or 3 locations that I think are best, and then go and present those locations to the director. What I like to do is to put the director in the car and take them to go see that location without them seeing anything. Is first of all, they're seeing that location without having any preconceived notions of it. If that location is working, you can see it in that person's eyes. You can see it in their response.
You know, since these are lower budget films that they're working on, they can apply this to their projects. When you say when you're scouting the locations and finding references that you would share with your director, how do you go about finding those references?
So when you're doing a low budget movie, you're going to have to approach the process in a very different way. You still have to figure out what it is that you're looking for. Now, what's going to be running that is the script. If you have 5 people who are all working on the same material, there's going to be 5 different approaches to that material. And what usually happens is you're trying to find a location that fits the details of that script, because usually you don't have the money to change things or to build things or to add things. So you're trying to find a location that fits your needs.
Good afternoon, Mr. Thomas. This question I'm going to ask expands on the idea of research. When you have collaborated with Spike Lee, one of my personal favorite joints from him is Crooklyn. Yeah. And this question I want to ask is not only the idea of research, as well as the idea of collaboration. Being that film, although it was released in like the 1990s, but it takes place in the 1970s, in that it's semi-autobiographical of his life. Like, what was like the procedure and methods you had to do with in designing like the scenery, the setting, but with collaborating with Spike Lee?
That film was a very different collaborative process for us. because of all the things that you just mentioned. It was based on his family. The screenplay was written by his sister and his brother. So you were dealing with a very specific reality and also their memories of their childhood. So I spent a lot of time looking at photographs, probably of their early lives together, and looking at and asking questions, particularly of his sister Joie, since the story was told from her point of view, of what her memories were of that time. I'm not doing a documentary, so I'm still having to make choices. I'm trying to create the spirit of what that reality was. They lived in a house off of Fort Greene Park. We weren't able to shoot there. So we ended up finding a block that was actually close to Flatbush Avenue. We wanted to be able to turn the block into a soundstage on some level so we could have control of it. Now, in terms of the spirit of the inside of the house, we did follow the dictates of their family memories in the sense that most of the time in the house is spent on the ground level of the house. You know, again, I was honoring the spirit of their time, not the specific reality. There were choices that I made that suited the story that had nothing to do with the reality of how they were in real time. Ironically, I probably spent more time talking to his sister than I did talking to Spike. And then obviously Spike had the final choices on everything, but it was really a lot of time trying to get inside the sister's head.
I had a question about another Spike Lee film. I was wondering if there was any special considerations you had when designing the hidden space in the bank.
The biggest challenge on Inside Man is the story of that story is the story of a bank robbery and what happens once the bank robbers get inside the bank. The most difficult part of that process was actually finding that location, because there aren't too many empty structures like that in New York City. And we looked in all of the boroughs before we settled on an empty structure that was down in the Wall Street area. The basement level, where most of the script takes place, we had to build all of that on a sound stage because we needed to have complete control of that environment. And also it allowed me to build those sort of hidden spaces that became part of the story. Seeing all these various different banks, I remember just collecting a series of photographs and images that became part of my design solution. I put a floor plan together, I put a sketch together, and then I share that information with my director, in this case with Spike. He approves that floor plan, and then at that point, we begin the actual construction process. Sent you guys a sort of piece of paper with some wording on it, and that sort of designer's tools, because this is going to be true on whether you're doing a lower budget film or whether you're doing a big budget movie. And the tools that we have as a designer are color, line, and texture, okay? And with those three tools, you can serve every aspect of the script. You can serve basic action, whatever themes or concepts that you're trying to support, and you can serve the dramatic statements that you're trying to make about the movie. We're all going to have an emotional response to color. Pink is going to say one thing, black is going to say something else. So you're using that as a tool to determine what emotion you want the audience to feel. With texture, a smooth surface is going to say something very different than a rough surface. So whatever you're going to use those surfaces to evoke an emotional response in the audience. I am trying to lead the audience on the journey about what it is that they are supposed to feel at any given moment. What I mean when I say line is that when you're in a long room, or if you're in a rectangular room, or if you're in a square box, all of that's going to determine how the audience is going to feel about any given moment. So you use those three moments, even if you're on a low budget movie, to help you determine the choices, to support the story, but also to take the audience on an emotional journey. Hidden Figures is a film which as we all know, it's about these three Black women who were scientists working for NASA. At that particular time, the Black women were segregated from the major workforce. So in many ways, it becomes an upstairs, downstairs story. The world that the Black women are working with is in a basement. And one of the things that I did in order to, again, using color, line, and texture, is that I put them in a world which was made of concrete walls. Very harsh environment, very stark, very tough. So when the character, Catherine, goes upstairs, that world is very different. Because again, the world of Nassau, if we had honored the reality, she would have been in another cinder block room. This whole movie is about people on journeys. I chose to create an environment that was circular, like the world. So I use a lot of marble. I use a lot of slick surfaces, because in many ways, she is going on a journey around her own world. Every person who views this environment will view it differently. The important thing for me was that she was going on a journey in an unknown world. These are the SketchUp drawings that were developed from my ideas. And as you can see here, I put them in a circular space. This is my initial rough sketch showing what I wanted to do. The fundamental ideas are all caught in this little thumbnail sketch. I share it with my set designer, and we began to develop the idea. So you can see what kind of light fixtures I was thinking about here. I was thinking about putting all these light fixtures in a circle. This is how that set started. It started off with those rough sketches.
Did you aim for any sort of historical accuracy, or was it just solely based on like the artistic experience of the audience?
The details are from the actual research. I'm mixing my dramatic imagination up with reality.
When you're designing that set, what do you have to take in consideration lighting of that set?
Well, that's exactly right. Now, if you look at this set, there's two things. Very hard to light a circular room. You know, I put essentially a big circular disc up in the sky, which was essentially a big light box. So I didn't have to hear any complaints from my cinematographer that he or she wasn't able to light the set. Because essentially I provided them with the lighting solution. I do that as a designer because I don't want to hear from my cinematographer, well, how am I going to light this thing? You know, and also if you look at the color of the walls are very, very dark because, as you know, most cinematographers don't like to light walls. They want things to be dark. So again, it's a combination. Designing for me is a combination of what I'm trying to say dramatically and how I'm going to support the story. I have to think about how the actors are going to move to the space. You know, if you look at Kevin Costner's office, I mean, it's much bigger than it would be in real time. It's truly a collaboration. In other words, I designed this set knowing that I had to light it. I've learned through experience that if I were to design the most beautiful set and I hadn't thought about lighting, it's going to be a problem. So everything that I do, I think about the lighting, I think about camera positions, I think about how the camera is going to move through the space.
Hello. How much control do you, Mr. Thomas, have as a designer outside in scene that's exterior, like a traffic-heavy kind of area?
Well, look, I mean, clearly we're all working within the restrictions that each city will impose on the exterior locations. In many ways, this kind of leads us naturally into the sun is also a star. There's a lot of New York exteriors on that film. The challenge in designing that film was not only were you looking for locations that were servicing, but I also had to find blocks and streets that we could control so that we could shoot that film. Very often what will happen in the locations process is that you will go out and you will identify several different locations or several different streets. For example, in that film, the scene in which she is almost run over by the car, I had actually looked at several larger streets for that specific scene because I felt that I wanted to create a bigger sense of danger. So my initial impulse was to find larger streets that were busier. With those larger streets, we couldn't control them. And locations came back to us and says, well, we can't control this. So as a result, I had to choose a much smaller street because it became about what we could control or what the city would give us permission to shoot. So that will change depending on whatever what movie that you are doing.
I am just wondering, how do you get the resources to get started on your, production design journey?
Okay, so what happens is, even if you're, Sun is also a star, was what they call a tier 1 film, which means that the budget is fairly low, and the budget was between $5 and $7 million. What I try and do when I'm working on these kinds of movies, I try and find interiors that are already completely dressed. The layout of that house is supporting the story that is being told. So I'm not having to come in and change anything in the house itself. And the only thing that I'm coming in is that I'm coming in and adding a piece of furniture, or I'm changing the artwork on the walls to be more reflective of the character. The locations department is part of the art department. They are collaborating with me on the look of the movie. And they are a vital part of determining the look of the film, because they are working very closely to help me shape the look of the movie. So I really want to applaud them and to let you folks know that they are a key collaborator. That locations team is going out and is trying to find the things that are indicated in the script, following my directions in terms of the size and the scale of what it is that we're looking for. They're bringing me back choices, and then I go back and I look at every single choice, and I choose the choice that I think is best going to suit the needs of the story.
When it came to locations for The Sun Is Also a Star, was there any obstacles during production?
Usually what happens is, if there's a red flag with a location, it usually reveals itself fairly quickly, and at which point you move on. Shooting in the subways in New York has gotten to be very, very difficult. They really only give you one station option, and they give you like a track, exterior track. So you have to do everything there. They gave us one station, and I had to divide that station into 3 different subway stops. I painted 1/3 one section. I left the other 2 as the color that they were, but I changed the signage. You as the viewer are not going to be aware of what those changes are if I did my job successfully. There's a very small moment towards the end of the film in which she is back in Jamaica, and she's walking down a street that's supposed to be in Jamaica. Well, we couldn't go to Jamaica.
No.
We couldn't afford it. But I'm out scouting in Brooklyn, and all of a sudden I see these alleyways with all of these garages on them. I've already done my research. I know what the streets of Jamaica look like, and I roll up all these garage doors, and I turn all of these garage fronts into storefronts. We dressed about 200 yards of this alley, essentially, and turned it into Jamaica. But that's the kind of thing that you have to do, creative thinking that you have to do when you're making a low-budget film.
Wynn, are there any other tricks specifically about shooting in New York, tools of the trade, things that New York productions know about dealing with crowds, locations, things to avoid?
We're trying to serve multiple gods here. Most important thing that we're trying to serve is the script, right? We're trying to satisfy the demands of the script. On top of that, I'm trying to serve what I want the movie to look like. So I'm trying to serve the aesthetic and the emotional needs of the script. But then you also have something called the schedule. And the schedule will begin to dictate the choices that you make.
Right.
Because at some point or another, I can only fight that so much. The first idea is going to come back to me and say, we need to do 5 things at this one location. Okay? So that's going to begin to challenge, like, where am I going to shoot these sequences? That's one of the tricks of the trade that your production designer should be assisting you with when you are designing your low budget film.
Makes me want to go around with the students and ask them where they're at with their project. So I know, Elijah, you have a really clear answer on this.
This film is entirely going to be taking place in one setting, and my intention for the film is to shoot it in one take. The documentary I made, which was of a pastor, he was nice enough to allow me to use his parish hall as a setting. Since the idea is going to be of a party, the tables arranged, the decorations. The main character is going to be a DJ, and there's a stage in the parish hall. And so I really have an idea of where we're going to position. Will there be times where the production design will conflict with the cinematography?
It happens all the time. You wish, in many ways, you wish that it would not happen. One of the reasons I try and put a concept together, because it allows me to articulate what it is that I think that we're trying to do as a production. And once that the director signs off on that, then that information is disseminated. This is how all the early Spike Lee movies were done. I think of this collaborative process as a pyramid with the director at the top and the production designer and the cinematographer on the other ends of that pyramid. Ultimately, in the end, it's the director who should be running the machine, not the cinematographer and not the production designer. We are there to collaborate, to support the director's vision. Where things get complicated is when the director is not stepping up to the plate to say what it is he or she wants.
My film mainly takes place in two locations, an apartment and then the basement in that apartment building in that brownstone. I have a good idea of where I'm going to shoot the apartment. I have an older brother who lives in his own apartment, so I'm just going to, I guess sweet talk him into letting me use his living space for a day or two. The basement, however, I don't have, so I definitely have to do some scouting for that. I guess the question is, if I do find an unfinished basement that, is totally empty, how do I keep myself from going overboard with, these sort of like old decorations? How do you cap it at a believable level?
Is it a drama or is it a comedy?
It's a bit of a comedy.
You're going to look for something that's going to support tonally, in other words, color, line, and texture, what's going to support your story, which means that you're not going to look at grimy basements, I suspect, or you're not going to look at something that is completely dark in tonality. So that should begin to guide you in terms of what kind of structures you're looking at that will help determine what that basement is.
The film is about a mafia of grandmothers, and their sort of coven is in this basement. So I wanted to, be a little bit eerie, because the like second thing that you see in the basement besides the basement itself is them in hoods and whatnot.
You might want to look at some church basements.
For like locations, I decided for the interior for my main character's apartment, it's going to be my house. And for exterior, I've decided, since I kind of want the film to be set in the South Bronx or in Manhattan, like in Harlem, that kind of look like the South Bronx.
One of the things that we all try and do is to give a sense of authenticity or reality. You should allow yourself the freedom to go up and to walk those blocks in the South Bronx. And that's what you should do with if you don't have a designer, then you do that on your own and see what you see. And you should find a block that suits the emotional tone that you want your project to have, because there's going to be quite a few different looks up in the South Bronx, and all of them are fantastic. And all of them are very, very specific.
My film's just about a teenager who's dealing with the death of his best friend. 3 locations: his room, the living room, and then the cemetery.
There's going to be the surface level of the film. In other words, what's the action that's happening in the scene? But what good production design does is that it will tell a subtextual story about your character. In other words, sometimes it will say things about who your character is, and the audience will see those stories, and it will have answers that you're not necessarily addressing in the screenplay. If you go back to The Sun Is Also a Star, my storytelling is that that family, when they arrived in the United States, would have wanted to bring a sense of their home with them to their new apartment. The color of the walls in that apartment are the colors of the walls that you see in many Jamaican apartments. But anybody who is cognizant of that reality would see that choice.
Most of the students in Narrative Lab are on the final stages of developing the scripts, but they're still trying to figure out the look. What kind of material or imagery or references might you suggest they do so they can communicate their inspirations and about what they see visually for their films?
The jumping off place would be to define what world your story takes place in. So if you're doing a story about teenage girls who are living in Harlem, I would be looking at Harlem apartments. I would begin to collect all those images. I don't look at it for a day or two, and then I go back and I look and I edit from those images and see what images feel like they have a connection to my story. What you may see when you look at those images are furniture choices, are fabric choices, what kind of pillows are there. So it's those kinds of details that will help you tell the story and to give that world a very specific reality. Sometimes you're looking for stuff that just feels right.
I was wondering if you work the visual effects department and how do you use technology?
Initially, what used to happen with visual effects is that the production designer or from the art department, you would have a whole series of illustrations that would be generated in the art department, and then you would go ahead and give those images to the visual effects department. Very often what will happen is that the visual effects department will have its own illustrators. Now, it is the responsibility of my department to make sure that those people are still doing what it is that I want. For example, I was just doing a film out in LA. It was a whole sequence about somebody coming in on a bus, and we had to change the background. But what I did is that I had someone in my department come up with a series of images that I thought were appropriate for that background, and therefore visual effects would now use that as a jumping off point. So it becomes a collaboration. Last year, this time I was in Thailand working on a new Spike Lee movie called The Five Bloods. And it's a Vietnam era story about a group of old Vietnam vets who returned to Vietnam to recover the body of their commander who was left behind in the war. In addition to looking for the body of their commander, they're also looking for a stack of gold that was buried with their commander. And it becomes very much like the Treasure of Sierra Madre because it's all about finding the gold. So the climax of this movie is a big shootout that occurs at some ruins, which are now seen on your screen. These ruins were all built from scratch. We had to build these in what looks like a jungle in Thailand. Right now we're going inside one of the structures. You can keep going through it.
I thought these were the original photos, and then wow.
No, these are all built from scenery. These are all scenery.
Mr. Thomas, this is Noor.
Yes, hi.
So are the ruins still there? So
these are all, you'll see in a second, these were all carved out of styrofoam by the local Thai crew. This is what the real ruins look like in Vietnam. So I took my inspiration from these.
So this is the inspiration photo.
This is the inspiration. And then this is an overview of what I built. Series of drawings showing the structure that one of the structures that we were building. So we were out in the middle of this jungle, and this is how it starts. This is back in the shop where the crew is beginning to carve all of these sculptures in white styrofoam. So we had literally like 30 people. And that's a picture of me and Spike. I'm showing him, that's a sample of what the finished piece is going to look like. This is what you can do when you have a lot of money. That's the crew. These are the people that did it. That's my Thai crew. You can look at the level of detail on this thing. I mean, it's crazy. That's all styrofoam.
Did you have any concern that the fact that this was styrofoam?
Well, we sealed it, of course, obviously.
Oh.
Yeah. Sealed so it wouldn't burn. Yeah.
How long did it take you to make it?
It's several months. It took us we were about 3 months, two or 3 months.
You've worked on a multiple amount of Spike Lee movies. Have you, over the years, developed a shorthand with him?
Our shorthand came very quickly. Spike is a complex person, but we have a great artistic relationship. Like I said, I'll have an initial conversation with him, and then, I will provide him with the conceptual approach, and then he gets out of my way and he leaves me alone, and I just say, come and just show up. And that's what he does. He was in Oscar campaign mode and didn't show up until 4 weeks before we started shooting. So because there's a lot of trust there, that's what we're talking about, is trust. And that's the whole great thing about my job. I get to work with the directors and the producers and the writers, and then I get to work with incredible locations people. And I also get to work with the amazing artists who are part of my team, which is construction people and painters and sculptors and graphic artists and graphic designers. So it's a very full and joyful life.
And just showing that it doesn't come easily. You have to be persistent and you have to make yourself known and build on those relationships, whatever they are, and keep them tight. Because having a 30-year-old relationship with a director, you don't know where that's going to lead to. And so, you know, he could have stopped making movies at year 10, but no, his career kept going on, and we're fortunate for that. Thank you for, I know we're all getting used to this awkward platform, but we're pushing through, and it's really important to see that we're a community here, and we really appreciate what you're doing and taking the time to speak with us.
You're more than welcome. And I can't wait to meet all of you. I'd much rather be in the space, in the room.
Thank you, Wynn, so much for your time. Everybody say thank you, Wynn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick and Roger and the Academy for making this possible. This is a wonderful gift. You really inspired us. Thank you so much, Wynn. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.